Sometimes we wonder, how far is the distance between dreams and reality? For this village girl, that distance feels as thin as hope she has never told anyone about. She lived in simplicity, far from wealth and luxury, while somewhere else, a young wealthy boss lived in a world of power, luxury, and status. Two worlds, one destiny. Let's begin this story. The marriage happened not because of love, but because of a mistake that neither of them ever planned. Albert stood inside the notary office with a cold expression. His expensive suit looked too perfect for such a tense moment. He was a young, successful boss known for being strict, efficient, and never wasting time. In front of him stood a village girl wearing simple clothes. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the marriage documents, just explained by the officer. She didn't know Albert before. She only knew that her family needed money for someone very important to her medical treatment, and this marriage was the fastest way to get financial help. "This is only a formality," Albert said coldly. "We don't need to interfere in each other's lives." The girl only nodded slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She only tried to stay strong, even though her heart felt heavy. The marriage ceremony ended quickly. No celebration, no family gathering, only signatures, and two strangers who suddenly became husband and wife. When they walked out of the building, the village girl stopped for a moment. She looked at the city sky that was so different from her village. The lights of passing cars moved so fast, as if this world never stopped to wait for anyone. "Get in the car," Albert said without looking at her. Inside the car, the atmosphere felt extremely quiet. Even the sound of the car's air conditioner felt too loud between them. The girl clutched her small bag tightly. She wanted to speak, but didn't know where to start. Albert glanced at her briefly. He was actually curious. Why didn't this girl look like someone forced into marriage? There was no anger, no rejection, only a strange patience that somehow made him feel guilty. The car moved toward Albert's big house, a house that looked like another world to the village girl. And when the door of the house opened, the village girl realized, from now on, her life would never be the same again. But what she didn't know, Albert was also starting to feel something strange in his chest. Something he had never felt before. And he hated that feeling, living in the same house, but feeling like strangers. Albert walked into his large living room while loosening his tie. He was used to silence, used to working alone, but now, there was someone else living in his house. The sound of footsteps came from the kitchen. The village girl was standing there, trying to learn how to use the modern kitchen appliances. She looked confused in front of the expensive equipment she had never used before. Albert didn't speak at first. He just watched silently from behind. The girl finally noticed him. She quickly straightened her posture. I was just trying to prepare something to eat," she said softly. "I thought, maybe you hadn't eaten yet." Albert was slightly surprised. No one had ever prepared food for him without being asked. "You don't have to do that," he said coldly, though his voice was slightly softer than before. "I know," she replied quietly, "but I feel uncomfortable if I just stay here doing nothing." There was something about her words that made Albert pause. She was not demanding anything, not trying to change his rules, just trying to survive in a new world. He walked to the dining table, then cooked something simple. The girl smiled slightly. It was a small smile, but warm enough to make Albert look away quickly, as if he was afraid of feeling something unfamiliar. Later that evening, they ate dinner in silence. But this silence felt different from the one earlier. Not cold, not hostile. Just two people trying to understand each other without knowing how to start talking. Albert noticed how carefully the girl ate, as if she was afraid of wasting food. "Did you grow up poor?" he suddenly asked. The question came out sharper than he intended. The girl didn't look offended. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Yes, but I was taught to be grateful for what I have." Albert didn't respond immediately, because those words felt heavier than he expected. Later that night, as Albert worked in his study room, he heard soft footsteps outside the door. The girl was standing there, hesitating. "Is there something you need?" Albert asked. "I just wanted to ask where I should sleep." Albert froze for a moment, because in all his plans, he had never thought about this. And that night, two strangers who were legally husband and wife realized something silently. They were not enemies, but they were still very, very far from being close. And somewhere inside Albert's chest, that strange feeling kept growing stronger, something he was still trying to ignore. The house was quiet in the morning, but the silence felt heavier than before. Albert was already dressed in his formal black suit, ready to leave for work. He always left early. Work was easier to control than emotions. When he walked toward the front door, he saw her. The village girl was standing near the window, looking at the garden outside. The morning sunlight touched her face softly. For a moment, Albert forgot to speak. She turned around when she heard his footsteps. "Good morning," she said politely. Albert only nodded. "You wake up early." "I'm used to it," she said. "In the village, I usually wake up before sunrise." Albert didn't say anything, but he noticed something. She was not complaining about living in his house. She was adapting quietly, like someone who had spent her life learning how to survive. "I'm going to the office," Albert said. She hesitated for a moment. Then she spoke carefully. "Do you need lunch packed?" The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. Employees prepared his schedule. Assistants handled his meals. But this was different. He wanted to refuse, to keep his distance. But instead he heard himself say, "If you want to." The girl smiled again. That small, warm smile that kept making Albert feel uncomfortable in a strange, unfamiliar way. At the office, Albert tried to focus on work, but his mind kept going back to her. The way she spoke softly, the way she tried not to disturb him, the way she lived in his house like a guest who didn't want to cause trouble. His secretary noticed his distraction. "Sir, are you feeling well?" she asked. "I'm fine," Albert replied immediately. But deep inside, he was not fine. Because for the first time in his life, he was starting to notice someone not because of business, not because of responsibility, but because of curiosity. Back at the house, the girl was trying to learn how to use her phone. She had received a message from her village. Someone she cared about was still undergoing medical treatment. Her eyes turned slightly red, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't want to burden Albert with her problems. She knew this marriage was not built on love, only on necessity. But still, she was grateful, because at least her family had help. That night, Albert came home later than usual. He found her sitting in the living room waiting. Not like a wife expecting her husband, but like someone making sure the house was not empty. "You don't have to wait for me," Albert said. "I know," she replied softly, "but it feels strange if I don't at least greet you when you come home." Albert didn't respond immediately. Instead, he noticed something else. Loneliness, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that slowly eats at a person's heart. And for the first time, Albert wondered, if this marriage continued like this, would he still be able to keep his heart closed? Or would this quiet girl slowly learn how to open it without even trying? And that thought scared him. Days began to pass, slowly, quietly, almost too peacefully. But peace was never truly peaceful when emotions were starting to grow. Albert noticed small changes in his house. There was always warm tea waiting on the table when he came home late. The house smelled slightly of simple home-cooked food instead of the cold, expensive luxury he was used to. He never asked her to do these things, but she did them anyway, because she felt uncomfortable living in someone else's house without contributing anything. One afternoon, Albert came home earlier than usual. He heard voices coming from the living room. The village girl was talking on the phone. "Yes, I will send more money next month. Please tell him to stay strong. Yes, I'm doing well here." She didn't notice Albert standing behind the wall. Her voice was soft, but there was sadness hidden inside it. When she hung up, she turned around and was startled to see him. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't hear you come in." Albert didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked, "Is that for your family?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, the treatment is expensive, but I can handle it." Albert frowned slightly. "You don't have to carry everything alone." The words came out before he could stop himself. The girl looked surprised, not because of what he said, but because of how gentle his tone sounded compared to his usual cold voice. "I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly. Silence filled the room. Albert suddenly felt something uncomfortable in his chest. She was not demanding, not complaining, not trying to take advantage of him. She was simply trying to survive with dignity. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. The electricity in the house suddenly went out because of a city power failure. The huge house became dark. The girl quietly walked toward the living room with a small flashlight from her bag. "Are you afraid of the dark?" Albert asked. She shook her head. "I grew up with frequent power outages in the village." She sat down on the sofa, keeping a small distance from him. But the darkness made everything feel closer, too close. Albert could hear her breathing softly beside him. For a moment, he wanted to turn on his phone light, just to see her face clearly, but he didn't. Instead, they sat there in silence. Two people from completely different worlds, sharing the same darkness. Then suddenly, she spoke. "Do you regret this marriage?" The question came out quietly. Albert didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, he didn't know what the correct answer was. "I don't know," he finally said. And that honest answer somehow hurt and comforted them at the same time, because neither of them was ready to admit that something between them was slowly changing, and neither of them knew whether that change was love or just loneliness learning how to find company. Love was not the only thing growing between them. Pressure was growing too. Albert's family found out about the marriage, and they were not pleased. Albert was sitting in the large family living room inside his parents' mansion. The atmosphere felt colder than his own house. His mother sat across from him with a sharp gaze. "A village girl?" she said calmly, but the tone was full of disappointment. "You married her without telling us?" "It was not planned," Albert replied. "That is not an excuse," his mother said. "Our family reputation matters. You cannot just bring someone from a lower social background and expect society to accept it." Albert stayed silent. He hated conversations like this. Logical, cold, full of social status calculations. "She is not a bad person," he finally said. His mother smiled slightly. "Not warmly, maybe, but love is not enough in your position, Albert. You are not an ordinary man." Those words stayed in his mind long after he left the mansion. Back at home, the village girl noticed that Albert was quieter than usual. "You look tired," she said softly. "I met my family," he replied. She immediately understood. She didn't ask about what they said. She didn't push him to talk. Instead, she simply prepared a cup of warm tea and placed it beside him while he worked in his study. Albert looked at her. "Why don't you ever ask questions?" he suddenly asked. She was surprised by the question. "Because I know some answers are painful," she said gently. "And I don't want to force you to share things you are not ready to tell." That answer hit Albert harder than he expected, because she was emotionally intelligent in a way that his social circle rarely was. But the real tension started the next day. Albert's mother visited the house unannounced. The village girl opened the door and immediately felt nervous. "You are Albert's wife?" his mother asked coldly. "Yes, ma'am," she replied politely. His mother walked past her without smiling. "I want to speak with my son alone," she said. The girl nodded quietly and went to the kitchen, leaving them alone in the living room. Inside the kitchen, she tried to stay calm, but deep inside, she knew something was coming. People like Albert's family would never easily accept her, and she was afraid, not for herself, but for Albert, because she could already feel that he was starting to care about her, and caring would make everything much more complicated. In the living room, Albert's mother spoke one sentence that changed everything. "If you truly care about your future, you will consider ending this marriage." Albert didn't answer immediately, but inside his heart, he already knew that choosing love would not be easy. And maybe it would cost him everything. The past has a strange way of returning when people start to feel comfortable with the present. And for Albert and the village girl, the past was about to knock on their door. One evening, Albert was still working in his study room when he heard the sound of the doorbell. The village girl opened the door and froze. Standing outside was a woman wearing elegant designer clothes, looking confident and familiar with luxury life. "I'm looking for Albert," the woman said casually, as if she owned the place. Albert heard the voice from inside the house. His expression immediately changed. He walked toward the door. "What are you doing here?" Albert asked coldly. The woman smiled slightly. "Is that how you greet someone from your past?" The village girl stood quietly beside the doorframe, observing. Albert sighed. "Come in, but make it quick." The woman walked inside, looking around the house. "Nice house," she said. "You always liked living in comfort." Then she turned toward the village girl. "You must be his wife." "Yes," the girl replied politely. The woman smiled, but there was something sharp behind that smile. In the living room, the atmosphere felt heavy. The woman turned to Albert. "I heard about your marriage," she said. "Honestly, I didn't expect you to marry someone so different from your usual type." Albert stayed quiet. The village girl felt her chest tighten slightly. She knew that tone, the tone of someone who wanted to remind her that she didn't belong. The woman continued, "I came because I need help. My company is in financial trouble. You know I still have business connections with your company." Albert frowned. "This is not a business meeting." "I know," she said softly. "I just thought maybe you would help me because of our past." Silence. The village girl quietly stood up. "I will make some tea," she said softly, giving them space. Albert watched her walk away. He hated how polite she was being in a situation like this. When the woman left, Albert found the girl standing near the kitchen window. "You didn't have to leave," he said. "I didn't want to interfere," she replied. Albert suddenly felt irritated. "You are my wife," he said. "You are not an outsider." The girl looked at him, surprised by his tone. But then she smiled softly. "I know," she said, "but I also know that some past memories are not easy to forget." Albert didn't answer, because she was right. The woman from his past was not just an acquaintance. She was someone who once meant something important to him, and now, the past had started to create cracks in the fragile piece of his present life. That night, Albert realized something terrifying. He was starting to care too much about the girl living in his house, and caring meant he had something to lose. Rain fell softly over the city that night. Albert was still working in his study room, but his mind kept drifting away from his documents. He kept thinking about her, about how she always tried not to disturb him, about how she lived in his house like someone who was grateful just to exist there, and that thought made him feel something unfamiliar. He heard footsteps outside his study door. She was standing there, holding a cup of warm tea. "You work too late," she said softly. Albert didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her. Under the warm yellow study lamp, she looked different. Softer, more fragile, like someone who had carried too much responsibility for too long. "Come in," he said finally. She walked in slowly and placed the tea on his desk. "You don't have to keep doing this," Albert said. "Taking care of me." She shook her head slightly. "I'm not trying to take care of you," she said. "I just don't want this house to feel like a place where two strangers live separately." Her words stayed in the air between them. Albert didn't know what to say, because she was slowly turning their cold arrangement into something warmer. Without even trying, outside, thunder suddenly sounded loudly. The lights in the house flickered. She gasped slightly, not because she was afraid, but because she instinctively moved closer to Albert. She didn't realize it at first, but when she did, she quickly stepped back. "Sorry," she said, "I just don't like sudden loud thunder." Albert didn't say anything. Instead, he stood up and walked toward her. And for the first time since their marriage, he did something unexpected. He turned on a small table lamp and stayed standing beside her. "You don't have to apologize," he said quietly. Silence filled the room again, but this silence was different. Not cold, not awkward, just two people standing too close to feelings they were not ready to name. The girl suddenly spoke. "Do you still think about your past?" Albert didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he finally said, "but not in the way you think." She didn't ask more questions. Instead, she just nodded slowly, because she understood something important. Sometimes love is not about forcing someone to forget their past. Sometimes love is just about staying while they learn how to move forward. Albert looked at her again, and for a moment, he wondered if this feeling growing inside his chest was just comfort, or something much more dangerous, something that could make him lose control of his carefully built life. And that thought both scared and excited him at the same time. Love doesn't always break because of big fights. Sometimes it breaks because of small misunderstandings that grow quietly. And that was exactly what started to happen. The next morning, Albert was getting ready to go to the office. The village girl was standing near the dining table, holding a small envelope. "I found this in the mailbox," she said softly. Albert took the envelope. He immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from the woman from his past. His expression changed slightly. The girl noticed it, but she didn't say anything. She just watched quietly as Albert opened the envelope. Inside was an invitation to a business event, and a personal note. "I hope you will come. I want to talk about us." Albert's jaw tightened. He knew what this meant. But before he could say anything, he noticed the girl had turned her back slightly, pretending to arrange the dining table. She was trying not to show that she cared. "I won't go," Albert said suddenly. She turned around quickly. "You don't have to make decisions because of me." "I am not," he said firmly. I just don't want unnecessary complications." But his voice was too fast, too defensive, and she noticed. "I trust you," she said softly. Those 3 words somehow made Albert feel both relieved and guilty at the same time. Later that day, Albert went to the office, but the woman from his past was already waiting for him in the lobby. "I knew you would come," she said confidently. "I didn't come for you," Albert replied coldly. She smiled. "You always hide behind your cold attitude when you are confused." Albert didn't respond, because she was partly right. Back at home, the village girl was trying to focus on cooking dinner, but her mind kept replaying the envelope. She told herself not to overthink. But fear is not logical. Fear whispers slowly. What if he still loves her? What if I am only temporary in this house? She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She didn't want to become someone who doubted love that had not even fully formed yet. That night, Albert came home later than usual. He looked tired. "Did you eat?" she asked. "Yes," he replied briefly. But something felt different. There was distance again, not because of anger, but because of secrets that neither of them was ready to speak about. And the girl realized something terrifying. Loving Albert was not the hardest part. The hardest part was learning how to stay strong while not knowing if he would choose her or his past. Some problems don't come with loud warnings. They come quietly, wearing familiar faces, and Albert's past was no longer staying in the shadows. Albert was busy at work when his phone rang. It was his assistant. "Sir, the woman from earlier is here again. She insisted on waiting in your office." Albert sighed. "Let her in." The door opened. The woman from his past walked in confidently, like she still belonged in his world. "You are very stubborn," she said with a soft smile. "You are wasting my time," Albert replied coldly. She sat down anyway. "I need help," she said directly. "My company is going bankrupt. If I don't get financial support, I will lose everything." Albert stayed silent. "I know you are married now," she continued. "But I also know you are not someone who abandons people you once cared about." That sentence hit deeper than she intended, because she was reminding him of who he used to be. Meanwhile, back at home, the village girl received a phone call from her village. Her breathing became uneven. The person on the phone told her that the medical treatment costs had increased. "I will try to send more money," she said quickly. "Please tell him to stay strong." When she hung up, her hands were shaking. She didn't want to ask Albert for more money, because this marriage was already a financial help for her family. She didn't want to feel greedy. But fear started growing inside her chest. What if something happened to her family while she was living comfortably here? That evening, Albert came home. The girl was sitting quietly in the living room, lost in her thoughts. "You look pale," Albert said. "I'm just tired," she replied quickly. Albert didn't believe her, but he didn't push her to talk either. Instead, he asked, "Do you need anything?" She almost said yes. Almost, but she shook her head. "No, I'm fine." That was the moment Albert realized something painful. She was starting to hide her worries from him. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't want to become another burden in his complicated life. Later that night, Albert received another message from his past. A message that said, "If you don't help me, I will tell your family the real reason you agreed to this marriage." Albert's expression hardened. Because now, this was no longer about business. This was about secrets, and secrets can destroy even the strongest relationships. He looked toward the bedroom where the girl was sleeping, and for the first time, he felt real fear. Not fear of losing status, but fear of losing her. Fear doesn't always make people run away. Sometimes it makes them stay silent, and silence can be more dangerous than arguments. Albert had not slept well that night. The message from his past kept replaying in his mind. He knew what she was capable of. She had always been someone who used information as power. But he was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for the girl sleeping in the next room. Because if his family or business reputation was threatened, they would not just attack him, they would attack her. The next morning, Albert woke up earlier than usual. The girl was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "You should sleep more," he said. She smiled softly. "I'm used to waking up early." But Albert noticed something. She looked more tired than usual. "Are you sick?" he asked. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. Albert frowned slightly but didn't push further. because he was not good at emotional conversations, and she was too polite to admit she was struggling. At breakfast, the distance between them felt larger than before. They spoke less, not because they were angry, but because both of them were carrying worries they didn't want to share. Albert was thinking about the threat from his past. The girl was thinking about her family's medical expenses. Two different problems, two different fears, but both were slowly pushing them emotionally apart. Later that day, Albert received another call from his mother. "You need to come to dinner tonight," she said firmly. "Bring your wife." Albert knew this was not a normal dinner invitation. This was pressure. That evening, he told the girl, "We have to go to my parents' house tonight." She immediately looked nervous. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," Albert said. "Just family dinner." But she could feel it. Family dinners in wealthy families were rarely just dinners. At the mansion, the atmosphere was stiff. Albert's mother looked at the girl with cold, evaluating eyes. "How is married life treating you?" she asked. The girl answered politely, "I am still learning to adapt." Albert's mother smiled slightly. "Learning is good," she said, "because in our family, survival is more important than comfort." The girl nodded silently, but inside she felt like she was being tested. Not as a person, but as someone who needed to prove she was worthy of staying. When they returned home that night, Albert noticed something was different. The girl was unusually quiet. "You don't have to try so hard to please my family," he said suddenly. She looked at him. "I know," she said softly, "but I don't want to be the reason you are judged." Those words hit Albert harder than he expected, because she was thinking about him, even when she was the one being judged. That night, Albert stood near the window of his room. He realized something terrifying. The distance between them was not caused by anger. It was caused by love, mixed with fear of being a burden, and he was starting to understand something he had tried to ignore for a long time. He didn't just feel responsible for her. He was starting to care about her, too much. Love is not always loud. Sometimes, love grows quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore, and Albert was reaching that point. Several days had passed since the family dinner, but the atmosphere inside the house still felt slightly distant. Not cold, just careful, like two people who were afraid to move too fast and break something fragile between them. One afternoon, Albert came home earlier than usual. He found the village girl sitting in the living room, holding her phone tightly. Her eyes were slightly red. "Are you crying?" Albert asked immediately. She quickly shook her head. "No, just tired eyes." Albert didn't believe her. He walked closer. "Tell me the truth." She hesitated. Then she finally spoke. "The hospital called," she said quietly. "The treatment cost increased again." Albert's expression softened slightly. "You should have told me earlier," he said. "I didn't want you to feel like I am only here because of money," she said. The words were soft, but they hurt. Because Albert realized something painful. She still felt like she had to prove she was not using him, even though he had never treated her like that. Albert suddenly felt frustrated. Not at her, at himself. Because he had never been good at showing emotional reassurance. So instead of saying complicated words, he did something unexpected. He took out his phone. "I will arrange the payment," he said simply. She immediately shook her head. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. Silence. She looked at him, surprised by how soft his voice sounded. Not cold, not businesslike, just honest. That night, something small but meaningful happened. The girl was about to go to her room when she suddenly turned around. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Albert asked. "For not making me feel like I am a stranger in your house." Albert didn't respond immediately, because those words meant more to him than he expected. He realized something. He didn't just want her to survive in his world. He wanted her to feel like she belonged there. Later, Albert couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her smile, her quiet strength, her stubborn kindness, and he finally admitted something to himself. He was no longer just protecting this marriage out of responsibility. He was starting to protect it, because he was afraid of losing her. And that fear was slowly turning into something deeper, something he was not ready to call love, but something very close to it. Some truths are not meant to stay hidden forever, and sometimes the truth comes out at the worst possible moment. It started with a call. Albert was in his office when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. He answered. and his face immediately turned cold. It was his past. "Your wife looks very innocent," the woman said on the other side of the line. "I wonder what will happen if your family knows the real reason you married her." Albert's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" he asked. "Meet me tonight," she said. "If you don't, I can't guarantee her safety from social and business pressure." Then she hung up. That night, Albert came home later than usual. The village girl was sitting in the living room, waiting like she always did. But tonight, something felt different. "You look worried," she said softly. Albert stayed silent for a moment. He hated this situation. He hated that someone was using her as leverage. "I have to go out tonight," he finally said. She nodded slowly. "Is it about work?" "Yes," he lied. She didn't say anything, but she knew. She had started learning how to read his emotions even when he didn't speak. Albert went to meet his past lover at a quiet restaurant. She was already waiting. "You came," she said with a satisfied smile. "Say what you want," Albert said coldly. "And stop involving my wife." She leaned forward. "You know I don't like losing," she said. "Help my company recover financially, and I will keep your secret." Albert stayed silent, because he knew what secret she was talking about. The real reason he agreed to this marriage was not love. It was to protect his company from a previous financial threat involving his family business history. If that truth came out, it would damage his reputation and possibly hurt his wife emotionally. Meanwhile, at home, the girl received an anonymous message on her phone. "You should know who your husband really is." Her hands trembled. She didn't open the attached files immediately, because deep inside, she was afraid of what she might discover. But fear is powerful, and curiosity is stronger, so she opened the file, and her face slowly turned pale, because the document showed business and financial agreements connected to her marriage. It showed that this marriage was not purely based on emotion. It was also built on necessity. She didn't cry. Not immediately. She just sat quietly on the sofa, feeling something inside her heart slowly break, not because Albert lied, but because she was starting to realize how complicated loving him really was. That night, Albert came home. He found her sitting in the dark living room. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then she asked one question. "Albert, did you marry me only because you needed something from this marriage?" Silence. The question hung in the air like a knife. Albert knew he couldn't lie anymore, and this was the moment where everything could either break or become stronger than before. But either way, nothing would ever be the same again. Honesty is not always beautiful. Sometimes, honesty hurts more than lies, but hiding the truth hurts even more. The living room was silent. Too silent. Albert stood near the doorway, watching her sit on the sofa in the dark. He knew she had found out. He could see it from the way she avoided looking directly at him. "Yes," Albert finally said. His voice was low, heavy. "I married you because I needed to protect my family business from financial collapse." The words came out slowly, carefully, like he was confessing something he had been carrying for a long time. The girl didn't react immediately. She just nodded. Not angry, not crying, just quiet. That silence hurt Albert more than if she had shouted at him. But that was not the only reason, Albert continued. She finally looked at him. "I stayed in this marriage because I started caring about you." His voice was softer now. "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between living in the same house, between your tea, your silence, and your patience, I started to feel afraid of losing you." The girl's eyes slowly became watery. Not because she was sad, but because she had been waiting to hear those words without realizing it. "I was afraid too," she finally said. Albert frowned slightly. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that I was just temporary," she said quietly. "Afraid that one day you would go back to your past." Albert walked closer to her. He stopped when he was only a few steps away. "I am not going back to my past," he said firmly. "But your past is still trying to destroy this marriage," she said. Silence again, because she was right. Then Albert said something that changed everything. "I will choose you," he said. "Even if it means losing business connections, even if it means facing my family, even if it means losing everything I built, I choose you." The tears she had been holding finally fell. But she didn't rush into his arms immediately. Instead, she asked one more question. "Why me?" Albert was quiet for a long time. Then he answered honestly, Because you stayed, even when you knew I was not perfect. That night, for the first time since their marriage, they sat beside each other on the sofa. Not as strangers, not yet as lovers, but as two people slowly learning how to trust love without fear of losing themselves. Love is not only about saying I love you. Sometimes, love is about choosing someone, even when the world is against you. And Albert had made his choice. But choices always come with consequences. The next morning, Albert's decision was already being tested. His mother came to his office unannounced. She looked angry. "I heard what you said to that woman," she said coldly. Albert didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes, I will not leave my wife." His mother's expression hardened. "You are risking everything you built." "I am choosing something more important," Albert replied calmly. His mother shook her head. "You are not thinking like a businessman. You are thinking like a man in love." Albert didn't deny it, because she was right. And for the first time in his life, he was not afraid to admit it. Meanwhile, at home, the village girl was trying to stay strong. She knew Albert was facing pressure from his family, so she started thinking about something painful. Maybe she should leave, not because she didn't love him, but because she didn't want to be the reason he lost everything. She was packing her small bag when Albert suddenly walked in. "What are you doing?" he asked immediately. She froze. "I was thinking," she said softly. "About leaving?" he asked. She didn't answer. Albert walked closer. "Don't decide my life for me," he said quietly. Not angry, just serious. "I am not staying in this marriage because I am forced to," he continued. "I am staying because I want to." Her eyes became watery again, because she realized something. She was not just someone he was protecting. She was someone he was choosing. That evening, Albert did something unexpected. He took her to a quiet place outside the city, a small hill where they could see the city lights from above. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. "Because I want you to remember something," Albert said. "What?" "That I am not choosing between my world and you." He looked at her. "I am building a new world, where you can stay with me without feeling like you don't belong." The wind blew softly, and for the first time, she felt like she was not just surviving in his world. She was becoming part of it. But somewhere far away, the past was still watching them, and the final battle between love and power was coming. They just didn't know it yet. Some stories don't end with fireworks. Some stories end with quiet promises, and hearts that finally find peace. The final battle came sooner than they expected. Albert's past lover had gone too far. She released information about Albert's financial past to several business media sources. The news spread quickly. Young CEO's marriage suspected to be business-driven. The headlines were brutal. Albert's company's stock started to drop. Business partners began calling him, and his family became even more disappointed. "You are destroying everything you built," his mother said coldly over the phone. Albert stayed calm, because he had already chosen. That night, he returned home. The house was quiet, but this time, it didn't feel lonely. The village girl was waiting for him near the window, just like she always did. "I saw the news," she said softly. Albert nodded. "You can leave if this becomes too much for you," he said. His voice was calm, but there was pain hidden behind it. She walked closer to him. "I already told you," she said softly. "I am not leaving because things are difficult." She took a deep breath. "I am staying because I love you." That was the first time she said it directly. Albert closed his eyes for a moment, like he was memorizing that moment forever. Then he pulled her into a soft embrace. Not forceful, not desperate, just two people who had fought too many battles alone, finally allowing themselves to lean on each other. Weeks passed. Albert fought to save his company, but this time he did not fight alone. The girls supported him quietly, helping him stay mentally strong, reminding him to rest, reminding him that life was not only about success and reputation. Slowly, the business crisis stabilized, and Albert's family started to understand something they had never understood before. Love is not weakness. Love is courage. One evening, Albert took her back to the hill, where they first talked about building a new world together. The city lights shone below them. "Do you regret marrying me?" Albert asked suddenly. She shook her head. "No." "Why?" he asked. "Because," she said softly, "sometimes the best love stories are not about finding someone perfect." She smiled at him. "They are about finding someone who is willing to stay, even when the world is not on our side." Albert took her hand. And in that quiet moment, two people from different worlds finally understood something important. They were not perfect. Their love was not easy. But they had chosen each other, every single day. And sometimes, that is what true love really means. The end.